Okay, good evening, everybody. I appreciate a lot that you're making time in the evening. And Magda, special greetings. Yeah, thanks for the summary.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
so
listening.
yeah, those who did the exercise last week, the assessment, what was your maybe additional insight when you looked at the material in more detail? Was there anything that stands out as a takeaway point, as something that shifts or improves your understanding of things or gives you new dimensions? Do you want to briefly comment on anything if there was something noteworthy you want to share with the group?
I didn't finish all the readings yet and the task, but from the first text, the Harrison, it had a few really on-point sentences that were kind of making it again clearer to me that how neoliberalism has kind of premises that literally don't apply to any society per se, but societies are being built to fit to those premises at least that's kind of what's happening in certain development programs. And I found that an interesting thought, and I think it's worth kind of sharpening the eyes on when a theory is actually kind of analyzing what is, or if it's kind of projecting what should be kind of, or what somebody wants to be. I found that an interesting aspect of the reading.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he laid out that map of what is neoliberal ideology about, right? Which ideology always as a critique of the present and the blueprint for the future and how to get there, right? And for us to sharpen what all of these programs that we see NGOs and donors implementing, what are the underlying assumptions about individuals, society, politics, state citizens relations, right? What are the models that go into these programs, basically? Very important, yeah. Harrison also says, by the way, it's one of his most insightful points of recent years from him. Not one of them, but yeah, but for you who work in NGOs and so on, is that much of the development analysis is kind of putting under the carpet that they're actually talking about capitalist development. Yeah, so that the bourgeois development theory stuff, etc., they never upfront say, okay, we are studying here the making of capitalism, basically, in Africa or in the global south, right? And that therefore we know that capitalism comes with certain brutalities and violence, and you guys in the development sectors, how do you want to manage that, right? But that we're talking capital, so that goes to also your point, I think, about assumptions and so on. Okay, anyone else? Okay, so I hope that the fintech, once you go into the assignment, right, will be productive. And also that you now can track, right, this new statecraft where corporations, especially those very closely aligned with the ruling government, play a key role in performing the state and also at key functions such as sports events and so on, yeah, when it goes to increasing the popularity of the government. You will find the corporations coming in as sponsors and enablers and so on. So then this week, and again, a warm welcome. I'm busy. My Mondays are now, thankfully, I don't have to teach anything else. I just have in mind how to prepare for this and how to put my slides together, right? In coordination with also Tony Hastrup, who taught this these 3 weeks that I'm covering last year. And I also talked today actually to my global governance professor here in my team in Leeds, etc., to pick a few thoughts and ideas, and then mix that with my own research and expertise, and also things I teach in other modules that link to this topic of today, governance. Yeah, but when I'm coming to you, I had a whole day of preparing, right? Of course, also communicating with Nigel already for days about readings and emphasis, etc. All right. Yeah. Good. My camera is not ideal. It should be right. You should see me more straight, but I'm just happy that everything works kind of technology-wise. I will share again my screen, and also any feedback is always welcome. You can email me, yeah, about what works, what doesn't work. We always say to our students, start, continue, stop. What do you want? What is your view on what we should continue doing? So we're doing well, we should stop doing, and we should start doing. So if I always appreciate feedback on the delivery of this content. Okay. So sharing the screen. Share screen. Try that.
I didn't make the assignment, but I will give you feedback as soon as I can because.
Yeah, thank you. Also, like what this topic reveals to you. So sometimes this kind of where's the click happening? When is the click in your mind, in your appreciation and understanding, etc. What is it that allows you to link it to and improves understanding and your critical mind, right? And critical analytical powers. Okay, so now the screen is shared, right? And I have my slides here. So I have a lot to get through. I hope the message is clear roughly. So I was, you have in the middle here governance, right? And then I was just Googling. It's always interesting to Google and see what happens, right? Governance, Africa, EU, and so on. I Googled, right? And African governance. So these are some of the topics you see here. Water governance in African cities. Look again, who's the the website host, OECD. Then below that, you have IMF talking also about good governance in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So again, the significance here of the IMF putting up such a talk and who's invited and what are they talking about, etc. There's a whole report as well, good governance in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, IMF, a very particular agency to host such talks. Then I Googled, because partly this was also about EU and Africa. Tony had a lot of works in that area, basically. So I Googled also that one. And one thing I found is this West Africa Gateway, top right of my slides. So I don't know, some signs of better governance in West Africa, okay. So security, and then I clicked on the website, and you see at the bottom, you have this nice lined up of Western donors, all the usual suspects, and this kind of crime and terrorism and anti-crime field, basically, of intervention and practice and governance has a lot of foreign sponsors, external, non-African external sponsors. I did that. I saw that in my own work when we studied anti-crime measures and so on. That afterward, that talks about that and mentioned that also. So it's just incredible. Look at this lineup, right? All right. You maybe have one African agency, maybe African Union, but the rest Switzerland, Netherlands, very European, and you have anyway. So, and then below there you have governance EU Africa, which pictures are coming up. The slogans are also always intriguing. Together, tomorrow, today. And another talk there, what's chance for the new EU new strategy for Africa and so on. And of course, when the EU always advertises in the Ugandan newspapers and they are saying we are proud of the partnership and we are here to stay, and also the TNCs, they always stand big, these transnational banks, they also advertise we are here to stay. Then of course, if you are a student of neocolonialism, you wonder, of course you want to stay because you want to keep exploiting and creaming off the profits and so on from Ugandans and Uganda. So these things about the timelines, tomorrow forever, right? The EU, sometimes in the adverts, they talk about this is all long term and we are looking forward to the next 50 years in brackets of exploitation. So then I just wanted to highlight there's another little climate conversation. I don't know if you use that website to keep it updated. Conversation Africa, very informative pieces written by academics. Is that familiar to you? Yeah. So that's the website. So I usually check Africa as a country, Elephant in Nairobi, that website, and then Conversation Africa. Occasionally African arguments, but usually the arguments, the articles are a bit less frequent and a bit weaker also compared to the other sites. If you have other websites, maybe share with the group. And Nigel, I don't know what you follow in terms of blogs. Of course, there are lots of other key blogs. I don't know. Did you know that email system, that email service, it comes on Friday? Jeff Parler and his overview of African related publications and blogs and so on. You might want to get on that email list. It's very useful. It comes out on Friday with about probably about 30 to 40 references. You know, he just says, look at this, look at that, and so on. Yeah.
A bit more condensed and very well readable is The Continent. Comes as PDF. You can subscribe as WhatsApp. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
like sometimes have really, really interesting investigations.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Do you know who sponsors that? The Continent?
I think it's by a South African newspaper.
Okay, it's worth checking.
But yeah.
There's another one, the African Report, right? That comes that has a bit of a European funding stand, you know. So, and they often interview Blinken and praise, and you know, we have an exclusive with Blinken and so on. So it's worth these news sites and Africa Report and this and that and the Continent, worth checking sponsors, right? Okay, and just I put here also TNI is another institute that puts, you know, this is also governance, right? What does the US election mean for global justice movements and so on? So just saying that stuff happening, that once you go into governance issues, you need to maybe follow if you want to see a little bit what people are talking about and are concerned with. Yeah, are we together? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So here today I want to give you some concepts, because I think really I'm an economist by training. My first degree was in economics. Then I did, as I mentioned, IPE at Warwick and so on. So, and the key difference, I think, between economics and then political science, social science, is we have concepts, right? The economics, they don't have really, they have a lot of mathematics and other funny things. And of course, they have also concepts. But the key thing, if you're new to this field of power, politics, and so on, is you need to get a grip on your concepts that are available to you. Yeah, and I can't overemphasize that. And I brought 3 concepts to you for you here today. One is power, one is politics, and one is conflict. Yeah, and then I lay that out briefly. Then I give you some slides about governance, and then I have some of these cases. Yeah, and my case here is food standards as one of the governance areas, and I have that material already from another module I teach here, North-South linkages, where there's a whole week on global standards, food standards in particular. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm not coming at this as a governance IR scholar, but like I do my best to bring in relevant stuff that I'm, you know, also familiar with. But I need to ground you also in concepts and show you the usefulness. So, for instance, my start with concepts was when I discovered Haywood 10 years ago as a PhD student. Key concepts in politics and international relations. You see that here on my slides. And it's just amazing. If you don't have any concept books, if you never had a look at one, you know, in your hand, kind of, or let alone in your office or at your home library and whatever, I really recommend you check out maybe buying 2-3 concept books. The top one is called Critical Terms in African for the Study of Africa. That's also very profound. Yeah. So these 2 are very good. For instance, right? And here in my office, I really literally have about 20 of these concept books, because they just help you to quickly get the definition, right? Rather than going to Foucault, so-and-so article, in the middle of the article somewhere after many pages and minutes, you find the definitions, you go to these concept books and bang, you have it. And it's usually like a half a page or so. They define the concept for you. Are we together? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So, what is a concept? It's a general idea or set of ideas about something. So here, by that we mean, what's the concept of power, right? That's what we're interested in. What is the concept of authority and all the other political science terms and concepts we have. But first, we need to understand what's a concept. What is a concept? And here's the key thing I tell every student I have. It's an idea composed of the various attributes. Attributes is a key word here, that give that something its distinctive character. So that becomes clear when we use the first example. The concept of a cat is that it has this thing that we call cat has these attributes. Okay, so that thing that we call power has certain attributes. That thing that we call authority has certain attributes. By authority, we mean the attributes A, B, C. So now do you know the concept of power? Could you bring it together? Do you know 1 or 2 attributes of power, how it's defined?
Power over over people, over a certain land, or like related to a certain, yeah, like over people, over land, and what was the third one? That I had?
The ability to get someone or something else to conform to your version of reality and to influence their behavior.
Thank you.
Those ends. I think that's what Max Weber said.
Thank you. So you have, every one of you kind of lands on an attribute, right? So power over people, you then that they conform to your view or that they do what you want them to do, right? So that's what you say is the attribute of power, vis-a-vis attribute of cut. Yeah. Anyone else with another attribute, perhaps? Or what's your working definitions if you go around in Kampala and wherever else you are? If you have one, it's always important to have a one-line kind of working definition. What do you have? The others in the room. Or you can also, I don't have one. I have never thought about this way. It's also fine.
I would say authority as well is the.
Nigel, wait. I know that Tony also told you. You are the school owner, isn't it? Wait a minute, please.
Okay.
You let the students come in. Students, the other 2 or 3 students in the room, do you have a concept, a definition of power in your head? Or just say no, I can't see you.
Then
Huh?
I say no.
Okay. And
I can't think right now, sorry.
can't think right now. Okay. Come in, Nigel, please. Authority is what?
Is the permission that someone is given to you to enact some kind of power that they have over another thing or person. So like I've given you authority today, for example, to run this session and deliver, conduct it in the way that you want. So
That's also very interesting. As I say, I'm a trained, self-trained, partly self-taught political scientist. So the definition I use, I get to that in a moment, for authority is, so someone giving authority, that could be well one, but I use the one, authority is a bit like the rule is seen as legitimate by people. So you can be a ruler and you can rule, but you are totally just using violence, etc. Then you don't have authority. So when I write that up, in my mind, when I make it up, so my working definition of authority is some sort of rule that is seen as legitimate. So authority has a bit of a charismatic leader, or something is, you're doing some sort of public good delivery, or something is right about your rules, so you have authority. So that's the one attribute I have for my own working. But it points out that if you
Maybe
don't have
also,
yeah.
if I would say something, I think maybe also power is the absence of equality or equal.
Right? No?
equal
No, not equal rights, but equal, like if someone has power, then he might overrule me. So it's like we're not on an equal base or something. You know what I'm.
So there's some sort of inequality between two actors, right?
Yeah.
It allows them the power to operate. Very good.
Yeah.
So
For me, I have an idea of authority that, as you told, could be given by the people, but at the same time, is not straight related. This is my point of view. It's not straight related with power, because power means like material things, means like clientelism, relations, and authority is something that could come from an ancestral way. A granny, she also has authority in Africa for, I know, for blood to countries. So this authority is not related with money or politics, and it's the way that people start to relate themselves from long, with the authority. This is what
goes to my point about maybe there's some sort of legitimization in that exercise of power. It's still maybe the granny or whoever, is still exercising power, or the government, but there's some sort of authority in that form of rule, so then we say government has lost authority also means it has lost that sense of legitimacy, that sense of the people agree that you are a good ruler and part or something like that. So it's a bit, so it speaks to this kind of, it's by consent a little bit, and a bit like people do it agreeable, not just at the point of the gun at their head. Does that make sense a bit? Yeah, so it's still a form of power basically. Anyway, so but my point also is very good. So you see already, once you go into this thing about what do you think is the attribute, you get a lot of good responses, and they are helpful, so that you have a running working definition in your head for all these key concepts. Is very important if you want to navigate African politics, global politics, etc. If you don't, you are a bit of running around in the dark. Does that make sense? So the concepts give you a structure to think, to put your cases, to attach them to certain concepts and to certain attributes in that concept, etc. So it's really you should really upgrade to a thinker and a writer who is aware of the concepts available for your given topic that you analyze. All right, and strive to work up to some definitional basic understanding about some of the key concepts. And I helped you a bit with that. So the devices for understanding things, concepts, yeah. So it's so beautiful. Look at my cat example, right? Cat, elephant, they're all slightly different. They're all animals, but then cat has these attributes, elephant these attributes, and so that way also power, authority, conflict, sovereignty, they're all defined by just one or two or three key elements. Basically, yeah, you can endlessly write about power in many books, kind of length, but also you can just, and these concept books, they boil it down to a few core attributes. All right, and they give you tools to describe, make sense, interpret reality. So I give you a concept of now politics, for instance, right? I don't want to go. So there are different definitions. The point is also that you need to strive to maybe check different definitions, different concept books, because sometimes a concept book maybe doesn't have the strongest or most intriguing and analytically useful definition. So you need to keep checking and comparing a few authors and books until you settle kind of in your mind again for some attributes that you want to carry forward and say, this is my working definition. There are other definitions for power, for imperialism, etc., but this is the one I use. Do you hear me? Yeah. So here, activity through which people make, preserve, and amend the rules. So it's about rules. Some other aspects says it's conflict and cooperation. Again, activities of the state, art of government, how we manage community affairs, public affairs, means of resolving conflict. So you see, right? I'm here in the politics department, but my guess is most students don't have these attributes in their mind. They study politics, but they never look at the definition sometimes in detail. They go directly into particular aspects, human rights and so on, but very few people have this kind of concept slides in their head when they go around and say, I'm now at the moment studying politics understood as whatever, art of government and so on. Okay, conflict, but here rules, conflict and cooperation in society, public affairs, okay, activities of the state. So that is attributes of politics. But now my favorite ones are the next two. So one is production, distribution, and use of resources. So that's politics. Yeah, politics is how we distribute, how we use resources in society. Why do we have tycoons like Bill Gates, etc., the super rich, and they can fly around and mess up the planet, and so on. So this is about resource politics, basically. It's very different from just talking about conflict and cooperation, right? So here, the key thing is resources. Politicians also, scientists also say politics is about power at the very end, ultimately about power. And I'll give you a power definition later, but here one shorthand is here, the ability to achieve desired outcomes. You get the other person to do something that is in line with your interests. Yeah. The ability, you need different, anyway. So, and then the next one is also very nice. The next aspect.
Can I give you one? Maybe you can comment on it.
Yeah.
So I was always taught that politics is the negotiation of power between two actors.
Negotiation of power between. Yeah, but you need to bring in interest, probably interest and conflict, because otherwise, why would they negotiate? Sort of.
Because everyone is always looking for more power all the time, and power dynamics are everywhere.
Yeah, so you can put that in your the negotiation of power, but they are different to actors. Basically, they have to negotiate. They have to sort their power. Basically, also because they have interest and they might be conflicting. Otherwise, yeah. But that's also productive and useful. But maybe one needs to see how that links to the other points here where we put that. The point is about yeah. So it's about power. I have the ability to achieve a desired outcome, and then also to negotiate power. Right? Is that what you say? Yeah. So that's also very productive, I think. So in negotiating, I could Yusuf Senkuma also said very powerfully and usefully about the Kenyan protest. He made one of the key insight really for me personally. He said the two parties ensured each other of mutual destruction. So the street could bring down government, and government could kill many and put in prison of the street. Does that make sense? So every actor had enough power and enough kind of resources to destroy the other or the country or the economy, etc. So you had kind of, okay, if we continue like this, we destroy the place. So it's a little bit about then they had negotiate, or then some sort of things had to be resolved one way or the other. So maybe that speaks to you, Nigel, I don't know. So another famous definition is who gets what, when, and how. That's politics. Who gets what, when, and how. They're clean as well, yeah? So the resources question again. But I also like a lot this one. Politics is about how society should be organized and run. So this is where liberalism comes in. Liberalism thinks society should be run in this way, yeah? Marxists think that way, whatever. Different schools, different political formations, etc., have different views about how society should be organized and run. And there's a conflict over should you have free education or education that costs you £10,000 a year, right? So that's what we mean here. So I find that very useful. And very much more analytically productive in my view than just saying it's about cooperation and conflict. It gives you a bit more, this one. And then because you have competing views in society, competing interests, competing ideas with regard to how things should be run and organized, and therefore conflicts. So this will also play a role in governance matters, right? Climate change, etc. How should this fight against climate change be organized, funded? Who carries the burden? Who suffers, and so on stuff, right? And there are competing views. That's where the whole politics is because of competing views and interest and ideas. If everybody would agree, you wouldn't almost have politics. As you mentioned earlier, the inequality is key to this view of politics. So power is a major theme of political analysis, how actors struggle for power, acquire, maintain, organize, use, extend, lose, and resist it. All right. So this is what I have about politics alone. Do you see the power of this kind of two slides? Or do you disagree? It's totally boring and useless. Yeah.
No, it's actually interesting to break it down. It's good. It's interesting to break it down.
To break it down, yeah, and at least see the different attributes that are out there, and there are more, right? I'm just summarizing the ones I have enough to get me going and my students, kind of going as well. So you might add others, but the point is, if you have no working definition, you are a bit at a loss as an analyst. Yeah, that's my point really, and you should strive to find attributes. So now power as well, right? So power, I asked you this already. So again, we need to have a few attributes here. Power as capability and power as relationship. All right, capability. So you have resource, you have the guns, or you have the money, or you have the persuasive powers or whatever. And power, but also as a relationship, because you have two actors at least. Yeah. And then there's a classical definition. Actor A can make actor B do something against the latter's own will. But also the key is here that actor B is supposed to do something that benefits actor A. Yeah, that's key. That as well. So you're not just saying dance for me, and just for the sake of dancing, but that dancing or whatever you want B to do is in line with your interest. That's very important. It's in line with actor A and actors A interests. So many people think also when they think about power, about influence, compulsion, coercion, restraining somebody, right? I also like this next definition here, this next phrasing, using resources and influencing the behavior of others to further one's aims, further your aim. That's the point. You're not just influencing for the sake of influencing and seeing other people do. It is linked to your aims, objective interest. Also, Gooden has a nice clean one. It's very clean. Production of intended effects, your ability to produce intended effects. World Bank has the ability to produce roughly what it wants. I thought the other day, give me 10 examples when the World Bank has ever lost ultimately a conflict with its critics, with opposing forces in Africa, etc. It's able to get what it wants eventually, often. I'm not saying always, right? But it's able to produce intended effects. In some ways, right? Maybe not in this liberal ideology way always. Of course, things, the politics on the ground are maybe not what the World Bank maybe has in mind or conceptualized, but it gets liberalized, it gets a signature, right? It gets certain things reformed, etc. Then Hay, I found this 20 years ago, right? Colin Hay had this way too. And you see again, if you search further, you might find another author who has a great definition. So here, Colin Hay says power is, it's about the changing the context in which people have to live. That means, again, the World Bank going in and saying you have to privatize university education. You have to stop doing coal and so on because of climate change, right? Changing the context, influencing the context in which people have to live. Changing also how people think and act. And then this is also very clean, the ability to have an affect that upon the context which defines the range of possibilities of others. Yeah, so certain things are now removed for you, young student in Kampala. You cannot study for free. You cannot study certain topics maybe because liberalism and capitalism has removed, and the power of the World Bank and others have removed certain possibilities for you. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Nice, right? So politics is about this, removing options, defining the context in which people have to live, and so on. Okay, so ability to change that, yeah. So you can also study there's a relational aspect. There's always a contextual aspect. Power over whom, with respect to what. You can unpack it further. Then you have these Luke's things that maybe one of you has mentioned this. So the first, decision-making power, agenda-setting power, interest-shaping power. These are very basic but very key things. So you get lost, you get slowed down. It's like if you don't have these concepts in your head, you're driving a fast car. Huh? I'll look you speaking. Slow car, a very slow car. But there are fast cars available. If you use the concept, you will be a fast driver and better driver, hopefully. So decision-making power, agenda-setting power, interest-shaping power. The first one is we have a decision-making situation and A prevails over B. Yeah, I want war, I want peace, or whatever. And then the war maker gets maybe the way. Yeah, so very straightforward. In decision-making situations, A and B, conflicting ideas, and then one gets the way. The other one is you control the agenda. You control what is negotiated between A and B. You say, today we're just negotiating about 1 and 2, option 3 and 4 and 5 are not on the table. And therefore you steer the direction of a debate. Does that make sense? Different from 1, right? So it's agenda setting power. And 3 is you're changing people. You have the ability to change people's way of thinking. Yeah, their assumptions, etc. You're shaping their interests, their desires, etc. So that eventually they think and wish and believe things that are in line with your interests, right? So A doesn't even have to. There's even not you don't have to negotiate anymore because B already, now that you have changed B's ways of thinking and feeling, B doesn't even resist anymore or have an opposing view, etc. Does that make sense? But the politics is still in shaping B's kind of ways of thinking, etc.
Would that be where something like propaganda would came in?
Yeah, exactly. So then the absence of conflict is kind of, you have achieved power and your agenda via 3, right? But it doesn't mean that politics or power has not been in operation. That's the point. Power is still in operation even if there's no conflict on the street or everybody agrees or you are going on unopposed. You have managed to shape or influence people's interests, people's perceptions, people's thoughts, wishes, beliefs, all that. Yeah. So it's a bit like in Thatcher. The famous example is Thatcher made the working class vote Tories. Yeah. So that's kind of the example here. Okay, then structural forms of power is a bit like the power is in the institutions, in the norms, in the rules. So you don't even have to exercise it face to face, A and B. You just B does it because of how the system operates. And if the system operates in a certain way, if B would do something radically different, B would be punished or so. That's about incentives and costs of certain cause of action that the structure gives you. Yeah. So you don't have to, A has not consciously influenced B, but just the rules and norms that maybe E has set up and is making B doing certain things, or B is more likely to do certain things due to the rules and so on. Of course, B can still do other things, maybe, but it will be costly for B. That's the point. So we talk about incentives and costs due to the structure that maybe E has put in place. Okay, so you can all look at this in detail. Yeah. But IR is a bit full of that. International relations, war and peace, and all that is full of this kind of stuff. If you don't do what the Americans do, you might lose your life tomorrow, right, as a political leader, and so on. So this is my full slides that I give people, right? This is not so key to me anymore. You can get through this in detail. I just wanted to show you again, but I did at the beginning of these slides, the power of basically also engaging power as a concept. Yeah, and that power is not just war and force, but also persuasion, rewards, shaping the institutions. Yeah, that's what also these last few points here on the slides that I go through faster. They say you can influence other people's and make them do what you want them to do via institutions, via shaping norms and so on, or agendas of an institution such as the EU or the African Union and the rest. And different power forms have different effectiveness, right, in getting what you want. So we talk about hard and soft power, normative power, and so on. There's a lot, right? Not to be overwhelmed, but just to be excited by how many options you have to unpack a given empirical case. It's also not rocket science. Once you take more time and print out the slides or read them. So also the question is always for an empire like the US, what is the effective power tool? Yeah. So they could bomb the place, they could persuade, they could work behind the scenes. What is then effective usage of power? And maybe also here, effective power, there's also differentiation between actively exercised power and acknowledged by others. So sometimes certain actors, they don't really have to always push it, right, and say, and persuade and make a phone call, so to speak, but their power, their leadership, the inequality that you mentioned is acknowledged by others, so they don't really put up a big fight, right? So, and the final third concept is conflict, right? And that maybe is an important one. Does anyone have a rough idea what a conflict is? So not a political conflict. What is the attribute of that?
Not understanding, a negotiation also.
Yeah, so two actors not understanding.
Yeah.
And also
Agreement.
wanting, not only not understanding, but maybe also not wanting the same.
Not wanting the same, yes.
Or not wanting the same.
Yeah, not wanting the same, yeah. So they disagree over something.
About, yeah.
They have different perceptions. They have, okay. Anyone else with the attribute?
Just opposing interests.
Opposing interest, yeah, very good.
And then kind of enough, like it has to be, those opposing interests have to be like relevant enough for them to actually become a conflict. Like kind of, I don't know, relevance of the interests, or I don't know.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so now you're already looking how you sometimes you have this opposing interest, right? And then maybe over affairs that are very crucial, right? Resources and so on, for the existence of the different actors, right? So they both attach a lot of meaning to this particular object they have, agreement over, right? So that's already you're building and trying to fit it. Maybe you need another attribute to nail it perfectly, right? So that's strong. That's nice, right? So different understandings, opposing interests has to matter, yeah, to become a conflict, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So, but the key thing is you found the key word here, which is incompatible. Yeah. they have the two actors. They have they pursue incompatible goals, including dissent over the distribution, appropriateness, and legitimacy of a specific object. So, the key
It's not also, sorry for interrupt you, but it's not also crossing with power, with the conflict, because one actor wants to get more power than the other in all these bunch of
and maybe therefore incompatible goals, right? So one actor wants more power, government, president, and so on, and people, the other actor, sort of, right, or critics, they say no, that's an overstretch, right? Does that make sense? So they're incompatible. They have different goals or different ideas about something, isn't it?
yeah.
What is appropriate? Yeah, so that's maybe would capture your case about different agendas or ideas about how much power an entity should have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but incompatible is the key word. So even if so I found this deeds, right, again, years ago when I put up these slides for the first time, and then I found another one that confirmed the key word here is incompatible. So look, for instance, there was another word here, another book that I used, and they have this for conflict. Beautiful, right? So they're landing on the same words, and therefore that's what we can also carry forward as a working definition of conflict, right? Incompatible. Something is incompatible. Something is competitive, means or ends wise. So again, if you don't know these shorthand kind of definitions, you don't have, these are the three things I would run around and basically always look for: power, conflict, politics. In that understanding of resources, different understandings of how society should be organized, and that's it. Basically, these are I also use sovereignty sometimes, and others. But conflict is very central to my kind of analysis. Do you follow? Yeah, and then I trace the conflict and the dynamics, and then of course power also. These go together. Okay, so was that useful? In what way do you think? And I can now maybe briefly look at you. What if I can see you quickly? What do you think was good about this? Do you see me now? Yeah, you see me, yeah.
Magda.
No, I am.
No, please.
No, thank you. I'm just trying to relate the three concepts, but maybe we have something.
Say again.
To say. No, I was thinking like the relation between the three concepts.
They are very closely related. Correct. They're very. I mean, it's incredible. But what do you think is exciting for your students to become aware of this option to work more closely with concepts?
I think having a conceptual framework to look at specific issues, specific themes, and specific areas. I think if we use that power, politics, or conflict definitions, we'll find those pillars in everything, right? So it's a good way to approach a particular issue when we're analyzing and critiquing.
Thank you. What about the other three?
Yeah, also the point of finding your own kind of definition, like comparing, like kind of whatever others say, that you find yours, so that can be like your go-to starting point.
Very true. Yeah. So my point about you have to sometimes check, 4, 5, 6 authors. Also, imperialism has different definitions, and some are wildly unuseful, sort of. Not useful, like there are different power. There some definitions are. I'm not saying it's an evening lecture, so I'm saying like some definitions are very wishy-washy, and they don't nail for me the core attribute, right? And then you look further, and then you build up your own definition with maybe 2, 3 authors, as you say, Berta, right? So Lisa, any comment? No? Okay, fine. So
I
good.
have a comment. Sorry. For me, it's like to have like a understanding of universal laws. So concepts or universal laws are a fixed constant which humans face. So we face conflicts, we face power, regardless of what it is or who is in power. Yeah, that's for me the concept to work with that.
Good. So it's also very, in that sense, global, universal. You can move your head around to different empirical phenomena, right, as they occur, and make up your mind. And Kenya protest, right? You can unpack the different. So universal, across time and space, and scale. Scale is another key term to keep in mind. Global, regional, local, and so on. All right. So really, I mean, just to show you, right? So this is a bunch of concept books I have here. This is Haywood. There's another one. So they really mean a lot to me. So, and it's a message to all my students. So let me move on then, to global governance. From current slide.
Can I put a little seed in you? Because I think when we read, particularly in the media, we read a lot about power dynamics and asymmetry and power symmetries and things like that. Maybe a bit more technical terms, but if you could maybe break down those kind of sub-concepts for us, that might help.
Yeah, but I mean, I have maybe later when there's still time and energy, I need to get through my other things with the governance. But I have it on my slides. I have further understood here. There's more. You see here. I mean, as far as these things, structural forms of power.
Oh, I think you have it. Yeah.
So this is quite detailed and nuanced out. Yeah. So maybe have a look at this. Also, then the power of language, discourse. These are kind of the key thing. Discourse as a representation of something. You can call somebody a terrorist or revolutionary and so on. So that's also power to name and label and so on. Yeah. Okay. So can I move on to global governance?
Yeah.
Power effectiveness is also a good thing to keep in mind. Different degrees of usage effectiveness. So you can put everybody in prison, all your critics, or you can try to persuade them and kind of shut down the conflict in that way that 5 years later you have a new generation of young people who all follow your ideology and they don't even see the old conflict as it was maybe 5 years back. Yeah. So the different ways that to talk about soft and military and so on, conflict again. So global governance. So this is what my colleague also here said, right? It's basically the attempt to construct institutions, norms, and rules to address issues in particular domains. So the point is, we all live in countries, and all these countries have national governments, right? Plus local governments, etc. And it's clear who kind of has authority and who is supposed to do what, isn't it? And also who has who's given the authority, as you say, Nigel, to do certain things and look after water and the rest of it. So you have a national government, so it's clear, roughly speaking, who should govern, who should rule, who should provide services that we attach with the state. But at the global level, we don't have a government. Yeah, we don't have a government. There's anarchy, as the theorists say. There's no one central authority. So therefore, that's a fundamental difference between country versus global. But nevertheless, you have issues, challenges, some people call it challenges or problems that require some sort of collective action. And therefore, global governance is an attempt to put some norms or rules or agreements in place, or maybe also institutions like organizations to go about this in the absence of one government kind of central thing. Does that make sense a bit? Yeah. The key thing is, nevertheless, you have at this global level, you have a lot of overlapping authority, and sometimes you have who should now look at this climate change issue and who can enforce, who can you really set the rules. But if there's no government, you can't sanction, you can't punish when rules are not followed. So how do you go about this in this arena that is fundamentally different? Yeah, where this author here also talks about this aggregation of authority, overlapping authority. So it's a very different political game and enemy, and different political phenomenon compared to national context. So, and what institutionalism theory, etc., what they are after is basically, okay, you might not have a one central government, but you can put in place things like the WTO or EU, African Union, etc., where then states will see that it makes sense to pool their resources and to hand over some sort of power authority to that body to cooperate. So this whole body of work is interested in how can we make institutions more effective and that states. So what are the conflicts and the benefits of such institutions, and how can you make them more effective in delivering what they are supposed to do, roughly speaking? Yeah. So I get go into more detail later. And then, of course, you can think about areas of governance. So what is governed by such bodies? But remember, the fundamental difference is not it's not a government in that national sense we have in every country. So the next 2-3 slides are also borrowed in part from Tony, Hastrup, who taught this last year. So global governance is an outcome of the need to govern forces and practice of globalization. It's also this Cold War. We have a globalizing world where people are opening the borders. You have technology that is now shared. You have security affecting and so on. So this is a global world where things are overlapping also the issue areas, and somebody has to sit down and negotiate and sort out these conflicting interests and so on. There's also what scientists call interdependencies. Yeah, so we're so interconnected with globalization and with global capitalism that again there emerge issues that need global governance, a kind of global rule of sorts, norms, institutions. So governance occurs then at that level through agreements, international law, but also norms, something like G20. It's not exactly an institution, but it's kind of a forum, platform for states to come together and so on. So just keep in mind, it's about there's no government, but states have to somehow cooperate or talk or meet or whatever to pursue their interests and to sort their politics, sort of. But these international institutions, they are vectors for global governance. And now this theory that you read, right? It's a dense text, Tony's text, but it gives you an idea for the kind of language these theorists use and the concepts they have and what they put emphasis on, what they are basically chasing as analysts. And I say it's about cooperation between states that don't have to cooperate, that don't have to follow rules of such bodies and so on. It helps us to understand, therefore, structures, rules, norms, and roles also in international politics, and understand that WTO and all these international organizations, they are political entities. Not just technical entities, political entities where politics is happening and so on. So key is also that this is all about transnational actors, global issues, climate, trade, food standards, and so on. So it's really cross-border stuff that this is trying to address. These are roles of institutions, global governance institutions. So it's about agenda setting. Remember earlier, very useful. Now you know. Lux talks about second dimension, agenda setting. So power comes in. Who sets the agenda? Who excludes, therefore, certain topics from being negotiated, and so on. Policy making, implementation, enforcement, and also monitoring and further adjustments and evaluation and so on. Okay. Good. Once you again have these basic frameworks for understanding, approaching institutions and global governance in mind, you can then go and look out for cases that you then can try to unpack and analyze. So here is different, remember these areas of governance, So climate change is one. We know it's massive problem, massive challenge, massive issue, is a global issue. You can't chase climate change alone as a state. You need to do collectively in some ways. So, and we also know there's a very intriguing Africa kind of case here where Africa has contributed historically very little to this problem and yet pays a heavy price currently with all the floods and the rest. Whatever happens moving forward and is currently happening will affect Africa and Africans, and the economic development and the rest. And so now it's interesting how this will all be negotiated, right? Okay, so, and there's a recent conversation piece that has good data, and it's kind of short, sweet read with some of the numbers also very good there. So another would be economic governance. Is another global governance area with institutions like the IFIs. Often you also see that these institutions were set up by northern countries. They are very dominant there. Of course, in the World Bank, you also have other countries with voting rights, etc. But the dominant voting rights are the US and other northern traditional powers. Also, you might know the World Bank presidency always goes to an American, the IMF to a French guy, and so on. So, and some of us, they regard these institutions as neo-colonial, and equally WTO was problematic. Yeah, this institution that governs global trade, so it advances liberalism, and some of the articles we have suggest that these institutions are tools in the hands of the traditional powers to pursue their interests. Okay, and but they are very important, WTO, and they change again. You remember that definition of you change the options under which people have context and in which people live. So these institutions, they're doing that. Yeah, so certain rules or certain policies that maybe African countries pursued and Latin American countries pursued in the 70s and 80s to get their capitalism going, putting up high tariffs, are now not on the table anymore, would be against WTO rules and so on. So that's what we mean. And that's how you can use these concepts also, and it becomes more easy to talk about such institutions and the power issues. Then you have this African continental free trade area. So you have the reading there that I've given you. That's a book that came out very recently, and I just started checking it and using it first time here in this module. And I briefly checked the chapter. So that's also typical. It's a bit different from the material that I give you at the third reading. Yeah. So these food label and anti-crime reading. It's a bit more. That is a bit more hands-on. But this one is nevertheless good to get a flavor for how these two authors talk about these regional bodies and the promises and what it changes. So the language of the analysts is also interesting for you, yeah, junior analysts. They're not yet going in detail into what this is able to do and all the complications and the hindrances and the setbacks of putting this in place, but they talk about the potential a lot. And I recommend you don't have to sometimes read line by line, but just browse and get the basic message, etc., of such articles. Do you follow? Yeah. So that book also is a good updated, and they are, you know, what we sometimes call safe analytical hands. These two authors, they're safe analytical hands. They don't give you weak analysis, but they give you something you can carry forward if you find it interesting. It's always important. There's a sea of scholarship out there, but you need to find the scholars that you trust in your learning. And sometimes we also check just authors for curiosity, what kind of rubbish they produce, and to just understand their logic, right, and their argument making. But others you need to find. Does that make sense? Also, finding trust. There's weak scholarship and strong scholarship, or more useful, less useful. So you need to find your authors. Very key. So these are here some, if you want to understand a bit like what the World Bank and the politics of the World Bank. So Robert Wade, years ago, the lower ones has put up some stuff about how the World Bank is basically a tool of the North, yeah, Western state, and how the World Trade Organization limits the development space for the global South. And then there's a new piece that I just found here from September 2024. So engage with that if you're more interested, if you want to have a flavor of how the analysis unfolds, yeah, and see whether you can follow basically, and the components of the analysis is familiar slowly with you, or is totally like from a different planet, right? This analysis. So it's good to get some blocks under the belt, so to speak, and familiarize yourself with what these analysts are concerned about. So, and global security is another governance area. The UN is a main international security organization, the World Security Council. You can see currently with the Gaza genocide, the politics of all that. Then you have the EU, with their capabilities and their power resources and their agenda, but also with their internal conflicts and disagreements. And then you have all sorts of extra regional actors in Africa's security kind of landscape. Do you know what we mean by scale? Scale, that term scale? So when we say certain phenomena, they also operate at different scale. You know what that means? That hints at this kind of global, regional, local, yeah? So that scale is also something sometimes good to throw in or good to think through. When you're a bit stuck, you say, okay, how does this evolve or take place, or it's visible at different scales? It's a smart scale is a good phrase. And these global events, they challenge also Africa's actorness. But now you have, for instance, South Africa challenging the genocide, going to the court and leading and so on is one of the key cases currently of global governance. South Africa shaping global governance and matters of war and peace and so on. Yeah, so very important. Here's another book that I just found to show you this issue of you have extra regional actors, also non-state actors that are playing a role in security. So one of these mercenaries, or the US also has different such groups, private armies, they call it, private contractor armies that wage war for empire in Iraq and in other places, including in Africa. That's what we mean by extra regional, for instance. And then challenges to African imperatives. So potentially regionalism challenges this old status quo that works in the interest of the North. Yeah. So we have a post-colonial context. The institutions mostly set up by northern powers, Western powers. But what do you now do? You might, the EU, but also this free trade agenda might potentially challenge this status quo and challenge this power status quo in particular. Yeah. But remember also, this exists within the neoliberal system, capitalism. So Egypt and other countries are very close friends with the Americans. So how much can they maybe in an African Union context challenge the Americans is open to question. So there are different dynamics going on. Then also what we call endogenous challenges, so from within a country, not exogenous, not external. So climate change is partly external to Africa, but affects Africa. So indigenous challenges that makes it difficult again to express or to materialize this potential for an African agency that changes the operations of the system and so on. So institutions are difficult to change, and Tony's articles gives you a few tools for that. Path dependency is one of the terms they have, right? So once you have made a decision, you have put the rules in place, you have maybe defined what the organization is about, the mandate, and so on. It's difficult to change institutions fundamentally. But you can also have civil society playing a useful role in transnational governance. So these are some of the things here, and this is our book now that you could check again. It's available to you. So maybe also check particular chapters that you find interesting. Now, I want to go to standards. So, but I've now talked for an hour, and you might need a toilet break. But this is very interesting. My example, my case, my applied case. But before I go there, after the toilet break, maybe I want to maybe go to these after slides just before we go for toilet break. Wait, so I have the global standards in food, yeah, that I will talk about in a moment. But here are the other examples I've given you, yeah. And your assessment also, you could go to that. EPAs are very famous, the economic partnership agreements. So the EU says you have currently favored access to our markets because you are from Africa or you're a least developed country, all these favored agreements. But for this to continue, that you have maybe low tariffs, then you want to sell your stuff in Europe. We need also to access your markets in a liberal fashion, yeah. And so they have for years tried to sign agreements, free trade agreements, kind of with African states, and so this is one article that analyzes this. And if you look at the abstract here, and also other abstracts of the papers I've given you, you can see already a bit the global governance and so on topic popping up very clearly: the conflicts, the disagreement, the inequality in agendas, and so on. Yeah, and the paradoxes, or also the someone on the ground suffers usually from the governance stuff that is put in place at higher levels, right? So if the EU says for us to solve our refugee problem or to limit it, how we see it, Egypt or Senegal has to do ABC, right? And then usually, and that's what my article with that I co-authored on the fight against crime talks a lot about. So these governance institutions and rules and so on, they have consequences that are often also harming particular classes and groups and professions on the continent, particular countries. So if I was just struck when I did put the abstract here for you, the abstracts alone are very telling. That's what I'm trying to say here. Are very telling, yeah, summaries on this stuff. And just on the EPA, you might know that the EU famously signed now with Kenya such an agreement. I think the first one they got through, right? And that's highly controversial because it messes up other agreements that Kenya has with regional partners in the regional trade agreements, right? And now that, so it's a beginning of or maybe a change, and it messes up certainly. So EPA, but it's a topic that I think they even studied for years. I remember for years, right? And it's worth also finding the latest conversation article of an expert summing up the state of affairs with EPAs beyond Kenya. And then we have my article here that we co-authored, countering transnational organized crime. Again, the EU is very influential here and very harming also. You know, this is about terrorism and seeing and stuff like that as well. So it can be, it end up, you know, this is the stuff that brings prison and tells people you are a smuggler. Now this smuggling route has to stop, and you know, making people who maybe yesterday were in transport, today you make them into criminals just because your new governance frame suggests this is the case. Yeah, do you follow?
Yeah.
Okay, and then here are some. Just today came through. There's a conference, the next European Africa conference next year in Prague. The panels came through. So here is, and I give you the link is here. You could just check this PDF on your own and see where governance comes up. Yeah, and they have panels on governance of climate change, security, of course, and so on, and just see how they frame it and the language they use, and whether you know, and just familiarize yourself. None of this is rocket science.
Can you
But
put the link into the chat?
It's here already on the slide. Yeah, you can also. You know,
But I can't click it on the slide.
I know, but you will find it also. I will put it in the chat, but also you can find, you get the slides, isn't it?
Yeah, last time you were sharing them, but then everyone went offline, so they were not, like, I couldn't download them as fast. But maybe you can put them on the online campus then, Nigel.
Yeah.
So once the slide goes up, you have that link, right? But it's ECA's conference. I will. So it's there. The point is, like, it's always a good analytical exercise to check the abstracts, the conference, call for papers. So the way these senior analysts, remember you are junior analysts, sort of. We are senior analysts. So the way they phrase it and why they're putting up this topic and which questions are they asking and so on. So here's one that I selected for you that talks about negotiating transnational regulation. You see here, yeah, transnational. We mentioned that, and so on. So, and after such a lecture, you should now be more confident and more fluent in engaging with such abstract and say, yeah, I roughly see my topic or my reading or my new concept understanding here in such an abstract. Yeah, but there are others in this longer paper you have here about climate and so on. Good. So I have some more to say about global standards after the toilet break. Is that okay? Or the water break?
Yeah.
So far,
Okay,
so
we're
good?
gonna do 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Any feedback as well, please let me know, yeah? Also, what you don't understand, also, I can always post papers later. So maybe, Nigel, if you can share any comments, yeah? I have plenty of papers, further references in my computer here. Okay.
No problem.
Only if you're on sensitive information, your screen is still shared.
Oh, sorry. So, so the guy who sends out this newsletter is called Jeffrey Parler. Yeah, I think it's on Substack and so on. It's really clean stuff. I mean, good really to get. So some of his papers and other things, new books and important articles. I don't know the website or the email contact, and it's on Substack, and
Which one?
it's called This Week in Africa. It's
Mm.
subscribe here. Wait, I have it for you. Substack. Doesn't cost.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Am I allowed?
Yeah.
In as I was censored a bit earlier. So my
No, no. I mean, of course you're allowed, but
no,
go
I
ahead.
was just joking. I was just joking. No, I was just thinking about when some of these, especially the global institutions, were designed. Like, it's like who was the African representation during that process, or is it safe to say that there wasn't any, being as a lot of them are designed in the 40s and 50s? So, GATT, IMF, and these kind of guys. So, is that where a problem lies for African representation and African interests?
Yes, I mean, arguably, the African countries are colonized still, right? 45, 40s. So
Yeah.
how much that maybe there's an analyst who can trace exactly, given the origin, this is how much there's a disadvantage for colonies or African colonies in particular at the time. So, but voting rights also. So whenever I teach this to students for years, for a decade now, North-South linkages. So sometimes you have to just look at, is the US still the dominant voting power in the World Bank? Yes, it is, and so on. But how much voting power does Africa have? So you need some, if you want to have some figures in your head, right, alongside with these definitions, as I advised, you need to check some figures. Does that make sense? So voting power figures, what is Africa voting power in the World Bank, and so on, where the battle stands currently, for instance.
Yeah, because I'm thinking in my head, like like the Berlin Conference, yeah, where the Europeans just decide what they're doing, right, with the world, and there's no African there. This is kind of similar in this sense. When we're talking about the major institutions, this is essentially what happened, right?
Yeah, or now what I'm talking about in a moment, the food standards, etc. They are in the ones that affect, say, avocado, etc. exporters in Kenya. They are set up by European supermarkets and sort of industry back in the days in the 90s or so. So even by that time, mostly white men and transnational corporations. That was what Naomi Klein talked a lot about, right? Transnational corporations. So even then, you still have predominantly northern, and then they set up the standards that then African food exporters have to follow. I will tell that story in a moment. So does that answer it a bit? And then slowly you get maybe more voice and so on from African agents, but then you have to study the research. How much does it matter? Does it really translate into negotiated different outcomes for African actors, where they see that the agenda, the standards are changing in line with the articulated criticism and so on. So I get to that in a moment. But that's always a question, right? So they have been set up maybe in the 90s under globalization, West dominates, North dominates. So over the 30, 40 years since, how much have Southern actors been able to change these rules and norms? Yeah. And do they have more say? Do they sit at the table where the current rounds of rules get formulated? You need to check case by case, I think. So here's the EU Kenya statement, or when they did EPA, right? So EPA is really a good current case study ongoing about global governance and trade arrangements and so on. and how the EU and northern actors are often an actor that causes trouble, also for the Pan-African agenda. So you see that also maybe with the security arrangements they do in West Africa, etc. Right? There's an interesting paper, maybe just before I go to my food issue, on by Ciala on imperialism, French imperialism, and coups and conflict in West Africa. And he says the coups, etc., how they are linked to Western and French imperialism. So, and I just did a half a year ago, so I did a small briefing. I also work sometimes as a consultant on, for instance, Kenya, Uganda, and so basically trade conflicts between the East African countries. Yeah, so they have an agreement. They agree on paper to free trade. Yeah, and let's bring down the standards. Bring down the tariffs. But then they have Kenya blocks the milk from Uganda sometimes. Yeah, Uganda blocks Kenya stuff, Tanzania. So they have conflicts. So that's sometimes the interesting thing. Yeah. So they say we are small and we need a bigger market and free trade is good for all of us. But then the particular politics of a sector or a government has to say, well, maybe the imports from Uganda are too cheap. The milk is too cheap, and our local milk producers are having a problem to sell their stuff. Do you understand? Yeah. So then it's an interesting reality again. So if you want to have an update on governance and Pan-Africanism versus reality of national politics and national political economy, the East African trade conflicts, also called trade wars, is a good example. And just to give you a flavor of that, how that kind of at scale, right? So at regional level, they agree, but then at local level, Ruto blocks milk imports from Uganda because some of these imports are from Kenyatta's milk company. So he wants to hurt the interest of Kenyatta in Uganda, business interests and so on. So it gets very interesting. The reality and the prospect of free trade between, African countries. Good. And of course, you heard maybe about the problems to finance these regional organizations. Sometimes you have these long lists where people, countries are not paying their membership fee, yeah, so to the regional bodies, African Union, but also East African. So it's interesting, very interesting, and for political analysis, very fruitful cases where you get a lot of interesting data and dynamics. All right. Any comment before I start? Are you still there? So maybe 50 minutes global standards, yeah, in terms of food.
Yes.
Let me share again. Share the slides. Share screen. And you can always email me later. I have plenty, as I say, I can send you references within a minute, yeah, usually. So. Slideshow from current slide. So now food standards. Okay, so this is about the EU said, okay, we want your avocado, all these beans. Maybe you have, in the UK you get a lot of Kenyan beans in the green beans in the supermarket. So we want that, but it's very sensitive stuff. And fish as well from Lake Victoria. So we need to check and be sure that we have standards in place so that don't sell to us poisoned fish and our people fall ill and so on. So it has to be clean, standardized, etc. So we call this. So therefore, in a globalized world, you need food and export standards, yeah, safety, etc. And this was heavily analyzed funded by donors, by these guys, for instance, governing through standards. So Ponte, Gibbon, they had also Africa-related research projects in place. You see here a whole book on agro-food trade and standards challenges for Africa. So this is a bit the context, yeah. So why I'm giving you not a security story, not today anyway, not the military story, but this kind of stuff. But it's still governance. So look at these many labels, yeah. So international food standard, organic this, bio that. So this is what you remember: global governance, institutions, norms, rules, procedures, monitoring, compliance, and so on. This is all happening here. So if you are a coffee exporter, you're facing some of these standards. And the literature here is this Ponte article you see here on my slide, Advanced Test and Alchemy, Food Safety Regulation and the Uganda fish export industry, but also another one by UMA, Kenyan horticulture industry. So here's also in the title, Private Agri-Food Governance. So governance, studying governance can also mean this kind of stuff, okay? Farmers, standards. So in your own time, go through these abstracts. They're highly suggestive and very, really analytically instructive, right? You can see already the politics of governance very nicely in these two little abstracts. And there's another one here by Freitberg. She talks about supermarkets and their kind of imperial knowledge. So neo-colonial relationships. You guys set the rules. You guys say how things should be monitored and how much the fees are for not meeting the standards and all that. Yeah. So there's a lot of literature on that. And political economy goes to this kind of, typically to this kind of topics and highlight that.
Especially with the Ugandan fish, there is also a lot of Chinese mafia things going on. So
yeah, but they all have to. So when they want to export, they have to kind of, on paper at least, meet the standards. And so Ponte also, so sometimes that we also see just paper ticking. So it's interesting. So the EU says it has to be all safe, and this is a procedure. But then on ground, it's a different story, etc. So that's what these articles highlight in a way. Yeah? But also the technocratic character of these standards, and the ambition of the EU to govern up to that, lake deep at night, sort of how the fishermen go about things, and the Chinese and the rest. And then that's another good article here by somebody also about this colonial kind of character of food regulations. So standards, so it's about 5-6 slides, yeah. So standards, remember also earlier the importance of concepts. Standards are norms, or norms are action justifications, how to behave, what's right and wrong. So if you harvest the avocado, this is how you have to touch it, this is how you have to wash your hand before and after, and so on. Yeah. So they try to govern behavior, governing conduct. You can in the food and agriculture aspects, you can govern different aspects: the quality of the product, the process, work practices, how you treat the animals, how you treat the pregnant women in your workforce, and so on. Yeah. Stated aims are usually continuous improvement. Things get better, win-win, harmonize everything, and therefore make things more transparent, accountable, in terms of that the consumer can trust and buy the fish from Uganda. Yeah, so this is making globalization work. Remember that Tony also said this global governance comes out of the globalization challenge. So many countries are now interdependent. Consumers have to buy and trust and so on. So getting the reliability and safety up, and therefore trust up. Why? The argument is this is good for profits, good for markets, good for consumers, good for jobs, good for poverty reduction, and so on. Context, historical context. There were some remarkable food scandals and so on in the 90s and 2000s. Yeah, so in Britain, I don't know what the term is, but the foot and mouth disease and others. Yeah, so this was risky stuff, but nevertheless, they wanted to globalize this. They wanted to make money out of food, so they needed to put in place some standards to manage the risks. So these are some of the scandals. Yeah. So if you want to have global value chains and you want to have food from all over the place, the argument was you need also now a global food safety regime from farm to fork, governing the risks of these relations, okay, by particular standards and the rest. Governing risk of globalization. So you have a shift from we just care about the product quality to we now also are interested in managing and so on your processes and improving them in line with our standards. Processes, so how you farm, how you harvest. Yeah, so there are all sorts of complicated names. That doesn't matter. It's very detailed and very technocratic and very kind of a control hype. Yeah. And when I started in Uganda as a junior analyst, This was the kind of stuff, standards for organic trade that NGOs and donors were trying to implement, and these export-related standards. The key thing is also this is a governance of public and private actors. So you have maybe the National Bureau of Standards, but also and the Ministry of Agriculture involved, but also private agencies and private consultancies who do standard setting and enforcing. Private, yeah, that's a key to global governance. Is not just states and so on. There are all sorts of other bodies also relevant in governing, in ruling, and enforcing. Not the detail doesn't matter. In your own time, check it out just to show there's something we call also sometimes standards related to particular supermarkets or TNCs. So Tesco will have its scheme, right? Then you have national schemes, but then you have these international schemes. So you see at the top right, Europe Gap. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Europe Gap, famous standard, nowadays called a bit differently, but this is when this was the name when this table came out. Just to show you just how complex this governance field is in a way. National schemes, company schemes, international schemes. You can govern, you see again the differences here. What are we talking about? Mainly national standard, supranational standards. Who sets the standard? How is this all linked to consumers? Is a consumer the guy in the supermarket or maybe another business entity in Europe? So it's not about that you memorize these tables, but just see how much you can unpack and differentiate everything and how complex this is, right? And now the next slides show you just again how technocratic and technical and ambitious these standards are. You look at this Europe Gap scheme, right, where they talk about, okay, this is how they have, in my lecture, which is on North-South linkages, I have a handbook where an Indian government, Indian authority or Indian entity, I think maybe NGO, translated this whole Europe Gap thing, what it means and advice and so on. And the document was 100+ pages, just trying to translate and make sense of this standard, right? And what you now have to do if you want to follow the standard and get your proof and your stamp and so on. So highly technical.
Are there any movements going on to reduce the, like, to make it more easy?
I don't know a case study of that. I don't know. I've not, but I do, make it more easy. I doubt, but it's worth checking. Also, what the African Union is doing. I mean, this Africa Free Trade Agenda, where there were standards. I mean, one of these trade conflicts between Sudan and Uganda was about a standard. So the South Sudanese said, your maize or so is contaminated. And then the Ugandan said, but we have checked it. Our national standard agency has done quality checks, and we have given it a approval seal. So you're not supposed, according to the rules, you're not supposed to challenge that decision by, you're supposed to now go along and let our maize come into your country. Do you see what I mean? So it's still highly political, and often then, however easy it is on paper, national authorities might just make a case and say there's a problem here with your maize. And
then I remember when we had the lecture, I think with Dr. Mulugeta, Nigel, correct me if I'm wrong, when he was presenting the African spaghetti bowl of like all the different, like actually collaborations there, even within Africa. And then when you go out of Africa, and even on the global level, or like, well, it's just complicated for everyone, I think.
Yeah, you might want to try maybe how an African body raised an issue with a European food standard and how that was resolved. Sometimes maybe the Europeans put a sanction. Back in the days, they put sanctions on Uganda often for the fish, right? They said you cannot export for a period of time, and then the Ugandan authority might challenge that and say we are now okay. We have changed this or that. So what happened in the last dispute that you can trace maybe in the news, but also maybe in the academic literature? Does that make sense? So has Europe maybe agreed to the dispute, and has it followed so how was that settled? I mean, at the moment, for instance, the latest was the Europe that I saw in the coverage, where the Europeans said, first, for sustainability and climate change reasons, we can't have coffee and so on from deforest, where you burning down your forest to produce coffee and other things. So they put this in place, right? The land has to be not damaged by this burning and deforestation. Does that make sense? So there's a new standard of that sort of thing. You have to prove it's not from land grabs and so on, kind of land. And then the African countries like Uganda, they said, but it's impractical and this will disrupt our trade because we can't prove so quickly. So they delayed it now, the implementation of that new rule, by a year or so. So that's an interesting way in which such things get negotiated, conflicting interest. But also Europe had an interest that some continuity takes place to make profits and let the consumers enjoy the products. Yeah, but there was a very disruptive new rule that almost ruled out a large section of the exports from Uganda to Europe. So check it out, the environmental sustainability kind of new standard. So this is a graph from this article here that shows just how much this Europe gap was also key to certain African countries where certification was going on. In that period, you see a boom in the certification. Yeah, this graph here. And also thanks to donors and this export interest of certain African countries, certification of global gap and so on was very prominent in some African countries, but also across the global south. So because Europe, Africa exports so much of particular food items to Europe, right? So again, here is one of these tables. So who's supposed to do what? Just crazy stuff, right? That is very complicated to get as a farmer group, as you struggle for income and so on. How this, but also for government authority. So imagine you are Ministry of Agriculture in Uganda, you get these big brochures how you're supposed to now reorganize your sector. And here one of the articles says exporters and farmers in the African country here were forced to implement new management and control systems. So it's also now changing again the context in which people have to trade, changing and having the power to enforce a new system, right? And here you can, if you look at standards, intervention, and power, you can see here there's a lot of technocratic zeal, a lot of monitoring, enforcement, so audits, knowledge, systems, traceability systems. You might see sometimes on the packages that you buy in Europe, you might see information like packed by picker so and so. There's a number on the package, right? Coffee beans and so on, so that in case there's any problem, they can trace it and say you need to check your picker so and so, or on that plantation side, there's a hiccup here in the product. Do you follow? So highly sophisticated stuff where the ambition is to make everything kind of bulletproof and manage the risk, etc.
When you said they were forced to accept these standards, what do you mean by force, and who is forcing who?
Well, a bit like now with this new EU rule that you can't import into EU if you can't prove it's not from a deforested area. So they can just revoke your license, etc.
So you see a rule like that. So that's maybe a policy proposal put on the table by one of the members of this institution. Surely there's some democratic means for which all the members of that institution can vote for that as a measure or not. Right? And they're not forced, is it?
And then what is again the final one? The final line in your submission was what?
And therefore it's not force. So if all the members of that institution democratically vote for this new measure, deforestation, whatever, then it's not force, is it? So when
I don't know the context of this particular analysis. I just tried to so here, right? This is an article, for instance, from this UMA text, etc. And the other text I sometimes give my students to read. So, okay, so but you're an exporter, and either you follow or you don't. You can continue exporting or not. So I was really surprised that the EU now delayed enforcing this new standard. So the EU agreed something that it was in the news. At some point they said, "Oh, our export market is in big danger due to this new climate change related thingy that the Europeans now come up with. We have a problem here because we have obviously maybe problematic we can't prove everything is clean in this new climate change kind of clean sense, sustainability sense. So all I can comment on is it's intriguing that the EU saw sense and was pushed by the African voices to delay, and therefore also accept maybe that their timeline was too ambitious or that's too destructive for both sides. So that's all I'm saying. With the implementation and how much is forced, etc., you need to maybe check for the particular case, and then. But here, in a way, then anyway, so we can argue about whether forced is the right word or incentivized, right? Does that make sense, Nigel?
Yeah, I just think it's useful for understanding where the power symmetries are or asymmetries, and
Yeah. I mean,
exactly.
this literature is very rich. This global standard literature is very rich, and also, so, and UMA is a good analytical hand, and then they did a special issue, and you can find some of this stuff in which way there was power asymmetry, and then Europe basically enforcing its interest in some quite whatever crude way, and so on. But it can always, it's the same with EPA. I think EPA is another key case where you can start the operation, study the operations of power, right? So the Europeans saying, you have access at the moment, preferred access, you have a good deal with us. So this deal will be smashed unless you start negotiating and signing some of these new agreements where we also can get liberal access to your market and so on. So EPA is a good case study for that. And why Kenya now agreed to sign it, right? Under what kind of coercion context? Anyway, so I would like to just highlight. So there's a lot of knowledge systems and so the problems of these standards, food standards, right? They're costly, and who covers the cost of adhering to the standards? So it's a bit like now also when you have maybe these anti-crime fighters, they might also say you have to now prove that you are not a money launderer or terrorist financer, etc. So now the banks have to maybe put in place in Africa extra measures, and that is costly stuff to adhere to these global new norms, right? You might also have trust erosion. Why do you always measure me and check my compliance and demand all this paperwork from me, right? When you on the other hand say you are my partner, I'm your partner, so why all this monitoring? Also, faking standard adherence is a big phenomenon. Rituals of verification. So, but lately there was no fish scandal that I'm aware of, where any fish was contaminated or so from the European side. But they were regularly, I mean, from the Ugandan side vis-a-vis exporting to Europe. But some years ago they were regularly sanctioned by the Europeans, and they couldn't export for a period of time. So it's a good case as well for how this power operates in this context. Exclusion of those who can't catch up. So here's a good case is this video that I have here that you can check, about food standards rejections. So it's a buyer sanction. So they can just say your banana is too small, or your pineapple is too big. It's not our standard. We needed a particular size, otherwise it doesn't fit the fridge in Europe. It's too massive, etc. So size, color, the look of it, the aesthetics. And here there was a protest in Kenya. They were cooking basically in luxury restaurants for diplomats. They were eating that food, rejected food, and said, look, this is costly. We don't know what to do. Once you reject, we're missing out on the income, etc. Does that make sense a bit to you? So how much is that negotiation? How democratic is all this? What about the authority and the sharing of cost and risks and benefits and so on? The trouble of all this. It's a good rejection of food from Kenya, and it's a massive problem because it's not a small number. And how do you raise that issue with the Europeans? And will these supermarkets listen to you, or will they say, well, if you don't want, you don't have to sell to me? Okay. And so here, Freitberg also points out, look, the Europeans, they want a lot of this monitoring, and they want to check you, want to look into your books as well. Sometimes TNCs have that, right? Where they say, we need to see exactly your profit margin based on your costs, and we need to make sure it's not too high, the profit, and so on. So she says, but on the other hand, can the African actors in the same way demand that the TNCs open the book and share and are open to monitoring by the African actors. Yeah, so this kind of one-sidedness of things. But it remains an intervention, right? So if we are interested in post-colonial states and economies and neo-coloniality of power, we always are interested also in what way this is a form of intervention in African, Ugandan, etc. economies, social systems, and so on. So, including into this issue of anyway, leave it at that. And then a good question is also: are they really bothered with the standard adherence, right? To what extent are retailers really interested that on ground everything is really as it is on paper? On paper, you get a tick, and maybe that's enough. That's what the retailer needs, and that nothing blows up. But to what extent they're really interested or willing to finance, right? Standard adherence. So if you want that this improvement happens on the farm, how things are handled, maybe how people have restrooms and so on, then maybe you need to finance that a bit as a buyer, commercial buyer. So here, to gain Europe GAP certification, suppliers must undergo and pay for lengthy audit processes for IPEX. So that's a kind of years ago, right, when she wrote this. Sometimes these things improve for the African actors, but it's just highlighting a little bit what might go on. And at some point was the reality. Campbell here, as I mentioned, says is all quite Eurocentric, all this. And another good author is Amanor, and he says some of this child labor regulation that comes up from the Americans is actually so that then the CIA kind of can go into the cocoa farms in Ghana, etc., and can shut places down that they want to then overtake or remove from the market, so that their preferred TNC and their business partners can get the material or gain market advantage. Does that make sense? So on paper, it looks like, oh, you guys are concerned with child labor and you guys are sending agents over, right, and help to monitor. But actually, it's a deeply commercial, political economy type operation to kind of promote TNC power and the business interest. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it then from my side. Any comments on governance, etc.? Whether this has, in what way, maybe this is intriguing, or in what way maybe my slides have now helped you to understand one or two things better, or what is the question you have after this? And we are now almost up with time, yeah. But let's have a final chat. What is intriguing about this? One of the most intriguing things, maybe several intriguing things, but what appeals to you as an analyst? What do you think is intriguing? The technocratic zeal, the auditing culture? Is it partly fake?
What I find interesting is that it's kind of this thing of, like, for example, this forestation guideline by the EU, that it's like imposed from like a moral high ground, like we don't want the forests to be cut down, but then not really taking into account the actual realities on the ground. And kind of how standard systems are enforcing or reinforcing the power dynamics. Yeah.
And kind of another hit, right? Another blow. Okay, we have done this. Things are stable. Now you're bringing another very disruptive regulation with your moral high ground, right?
Yeah, and kind of not realizing that it's actually disruptive.
Yeah.
Or like not taking into account that it's actually disruptive, but like, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of liberalism, kind of also a feature of it, right? It's very utopian and sometimes this kind of high ground stuff, more high ground stuff, and then creating costs or disruptive implementation. It's also, we worked this out very nicely in this afterword, right? Where the Europeans are saying, this refugee business or this smuggling business, right? What they call smuggling, and so on. It's a similar high ground politics argument, right? So, but who is a smuggler for the Europeans is maybe just a transporter in the local community. The business they have done for 10 to 20 years, right? Crossing borders, bringing people from A to B. But now the Europeans come and say, you are a criminal, and tomorrow you're in prison because of our new way of seeing you and categorizing you. Okay, other people, what do you think about intriguing? So the moral high ground, the disruptive nature in the name of doing.
I'm thinking about it. This is interesting.
So for me, it's always shocking how far
Your voice is very disruptive.
politicians and the leaders in Africa accept. Okay. So I'm always shocked about how far the leaders and politicians from Africa goes to accept the rules imposed by them. And they are like, they cannot go out. I mean, if they agree to these conditions for over 20 or 30 years, it's really, really hard to come out of this. Even to export anything to free yourself from that type of imprisonment.
Excellent. So I have, now that you talk, I have another example in mind. What do you think is another intriguing example of that? African government signing up to something that is quite damaging to large sections of the population, but now it's kind of, there's another key example of that, also in Kenya. Chris, what was the last example you have? I mean, what was the last example of that kind of nature? How, you're just puzzled by how can you sign this?
Sorry, the last example
of such a thing.
Of food exporting, all the regulation and the
Just
standard.
Yeah, anything of this governance nature, deals, agreements.
Yeah, and even what makes, you know, it's a trigger for me. It's like this food export, that these kind of regulations, they are not easy for African countries. I have a small business in Mozambique, and for we export foods, we had to, you know, like we can't just export if we are not a big company. If you are a small entrepreneurs that we want to export from the province of Mozambique or even Angola, it's not easy.
No, because of the expectations, right? The timelines and so on. Yeah.
And they call ISO, that is the quality control also. If we don't have that stamp, that is not, we can't do it.
And it's also usually costly, right? Do you pay a fee?
Yes, we had to.
Yeah. I mean, the organic stuff, etc., they were very costly. And at the beginning, the government sometimes paid for that fee, right? So you say, okay, you are up in the country, up countryside, village, cooperative, so and so, we pay your organic fee, maybe the initial assessment, etc.
Yeah.
But if you want to repeat it and so on, it's very. So what was your, Chris, again, what do you think was your last? So Magda, on your case, this is a paper I recommend. It's by colleagues about a company, small company in Kenya, where they tried to deliver and make business with a commercial giant. But
wow.
in the end, they were run down by the. It was just too many standards, you know, and there was a promise of a globalization that works and benefits you, your small entity, and you can go beyond your Kenyan market. But in the end, it was just they were exhausted and they lost money, etc.
Yeah,
trying to adhere to and meet the standard of this global retailer. That's the story, right? So it's not a EU rule, but it's a global retailer that says if you want to sell to our customers, but also because they come with a low price, right? They say our stand, you know, you can't charge this much. We need it that cheap and that many things by that time, and that caused a lot of trouble for this local entity.
As you know, we are more than 30 minutes over time, so.
Oh.
Anyone with a final? So Chris, do you have another example where things were just astonishing? How can they sign this?
For now, no.
No, I mean everything in general. I'm not shocked by the imposed regulations coming from Europe or from the international standards. I'm more how do you say, angry about why the leaders don't fight for the interest for their own people. So if for example, if that would be my country, I would set my own standards or have interest for my country. That's what most of the countries do. They fight for their own interest. But here I don't see any resistance in these examples.
From
of
the
this.
Yeah.
yeah, it's true. Even with the electricity in Mozambique, we produce electricity at Caorabassa. We sell to South Africa. South Africa process, and we buy to them. So this is like an example that I.
But you can find examples where governments resist.
Yeah, but Angola and Mozambique, they don't, you know, they are that neo-colonialism approach to the people.
But for instance, the EU couldn't get African governments to sign the EPA, as far as I understand. Kenya is, I think, the first one. So they resisted and delayed. That was a kind of form of resistance as well, right? So otherwise, Uganda hasn't signed. Tanzania, I think, hasn't signed, right? EU put a lot of pressure on them to sign, but so far, I think only. So it's an example of how they can. And the other one would be, of course, West Africa, where they say these contracts with the French and so on about they're changing the right when they.
Yes, but you are giving examples for Anglo-Saxonic African countries. We are not Anglo-Saxonics. We are only 5. So of course, I used to work in Kenya also, and it's completely different from the border to Mozambique to South Africa. So we still isolate in our decisions. In one side we belong to Commonwealth, but we don't have any power, you know, in the sense of decide to good governance and even to decide. So the Anglo-Saxonic world and even the French ex-French colonies, they work much better than